Everything ready for the session?
Yes. Yes, everything was
Uh,
good.
okay, good. Okay, sh- uh, so we start now. Okay. Okay, Andrew. So I'll start with discussing multi-WAN and network reliability in DrayTek Routers Part 2. So in this session, we'll continue looking at the network reliability, focusing on high availability. I will go some theory first and then hands-on on the later part.
Yep.
Okay, we'll start by looking at what is high availability is. Uh, Notice that the acronym is HA for high availability, which is quite used a lot. Well, not to be confused with hardware acceleration, which is the same initial. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So next is okay. Then we look at the routers supporting high availability mode. We took at two different high availability mode, which is hot standby and active standby. Then we'll go through how high availability works. And then we go hands-on exercise. Okay, next. Okay, let's start looking at what is high availability is. High availability, also known as hardware redundancy, refers to the function of automatically switching hardware, for example, standby router when a primary router fails or whatever reason lose power or hardware failure. If you have a router failure, you know that the pain to wait around, twiddling the thumbs for a new one. So it's quite a pain to have a downtime. Okay, when is high availability required? Okay, basically in any mission critical network installation that requires minimum downtime, and anyone who's considered the price of the secondary router a small price to pay, then redundancy is the way to go. So we'll become a very reliant to internet these days, and being offline for any amount of time can be very fast. Mm. Let's look at the video with some background information on high availability that I show in the action. I made this video a few years ago, so I'll play them now.
Hello everyone, welcome to DrayTek Australia and New Zealand. My name is Edward Roy and this video will cover high availability in DrayTek routers. High availability ensures business continuity of an organization. It is required in mission critical network installations where network services cannot be interrupted due to hardware failure. These can apply to companies' headquarters, hospitals, utility companies, data centers, and etc. This is mainly due to modernization, which has resulted in a increased reliance on these systems. High availability in DrayTek routers utilizes the Common Address Redundancy Protocol, which is known CARP. These allow multiple hosts on the same local area network to share a set of IP addresses. Its primary purpose is to provide failure redundancy, especially when used in the firewalls and routers. A common virtual IP address is shared between all the routers in high availability group. This virtual IP address is used by all the clients in the network as a default gateway. DrayTek routers that support high availability are the Vigor 2960, Vigor 2860, Vigor 2952, Vigor 2925, Vigor 3900, and the Vigor 3220. An essential requirement for high availability when using DrayTek routers is that all member routers needs to be identical. For example, if the primary router is a Vigor 2925N, then the secondary router must be also a Vigor 2925N. There are two redundancy modes available, which are hot standby and active standby. With hot standby mode, both primary and secondary router share the same WAN source. In normal operations, only the primary router is online. When the primary router goes down, the secondary router will come up and use the same WAN connection to connect to the internet. In active standby mode, the primary and the secondary router have different WAN source. Both primary and secondary router are online via their own WAN connection. This mode does require two separate active internet, of which one will be standby mode. Now, we'll demonstrate high availability using hot standby mode. We have configured two Vigor 2925 routers for hot standby mode, and these are connected to a Vigor switch G2260. We will check the internet connectivity by pinging Google DNS and also display a line graph monitoring the response time. Now we switch off the primary router to simulate a failure. The secondary router is pulling the primary, and when it detects that the primary router is down, it will take over the routing functions. While the failover process is happening, we can see the request timeout for ping response. Now, after failover has completed, we can see the ping response. The failover process took approximately 3 seconds. Now that the failover has successfully initiated, we will test how long it takes for the primary router to come back online and take over the routing functions. We now switch the primary router. As you can see, the recovery process took approximately 1 second. Thank you for watching.
Just to confirm, which was the first test hot standby and the second one was active?
So yeah, there's two type of high availability. The one is active standby, and the other one is hot standby.
Yeah, and
Okay.
those ones with the different failover techniques. What was the difference between those? I missed that information.
Yeah. Okay, we'll discuss further on this one, and
Okay.
yeah, with all the like technical details, how to configure them, and how it behaves, and what's the difference between them.
Sure thing.
Okay, Andrew. So we'll continue. Okay, all right. So let's expand on a few of those points. So first, we'll look at which router that model that support high availability mode. So in the video, we saw some older models router that support high availability mode were pictured in the current model that supports it. So that's include most dual routers and multi-WAN routers like the 3910, the 2962, the 2865, 2866, and the 2927. So those routers all run dry OS. So the Linux OS like the 3900 and the 2960 also support high availability. Okay, so this is the router that support high availability features. Also to reiterate, what we saw in the video with the older routers and the firmware, you had to have identical routers model, which is identical firmware and country code. So you can set up high availability using 2925N, for example,
Yep.
or 22920N plus, but you don't have to use one each other that are 2925 and 2925. You cannot pair them. Okay. However, now with the new firmware version, the only constraint for this feature is that all the member routers needs to be the same series. So you can use different model as long as they belong within the series. So for example, 2927, you can pair it with the 2927 AC with the Wi-Fi. But the firmware and the control code of both router must still be the same. Let's now look at the high availability modes. Okay, there are two modes of available, which mentioned into the intro and the video. There are hot standby and active standby. Okay, the first one we will look at is the hot standby mode. Here, both the primary and the secondary router share the same WAN source. To do that, you either need a modem with several Ethernet ports, like a Vigor 167, or a hub or switch in between the modems, and two routers. For online status, only the primary router is online. When the primary router goes down, the secondary router comes up and uses the WAN connection to connect to the internet. Also, the secondary router will sync to the primary router, changes something like the primary router, and it can automatically sync to the secondary router. Okay, for the active standby mode, the primary and the secondary routers have different WAN source, as shown here in the picture. For online status, both primary and the secondary routers are online via their own WAN connection. The configuration is not synced between the routers. One drawback, it means that paying two routers internet connection. However, an upside to that is that you can load balance the traffic between two WAN source. So let's take a look at how it works. Okay, and here we have an example of that. In this diagram, LAN 4 is directly connected to router 1, router A, shown here in the picture. This one. And then, so it used the router A's internet connection, likewise for LAN 5 connected to round B. So this is LAN 5, and it's connected to router B. So it goes to its ISP as well, the ISP2, so LAN 5. And LAN 2 and 3 belongs to the HA group, this one. So they will use the primary router's internet connection. So what happens when the primary router goes down? Okay, so primary router goes down. All the traffic will go to router B. So LAN 2 and LAN 3 will automatically go to router B. Also LAN 5 as well. So okay, just to explain, LAN 5 is not included on the HA group. So if the router B is down, LAN 5 will be out of internet connection.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay, so that's the active standby. Next is, let's go to the next slide. Okay, high availability group. All routers participating in high availability needs to belong to a high availability group and share the same group ID. The group will need to have one primary router and at least one secondary router, but you can have up to 10 routers in a group. Keep in mind that each router is active standby mode. It will need its own internet connection. So if you have 10 routers in your high availability group, you will need 10 internet connection. In hot standby, all the routers share the same one source. Okay, quick quiz. Okay, so what are the two high availability modes? Please,
An octave.
can you repeat again?
Hot and active.
Okay. Okay, yeah, it's hot standby and active standby. Good. Okay, another one. How many WAN sources are required to provide internet connectivity for hot standby mode when two or more routers are used? Is it okay, A, one source, two, a B, two source, C, one for each other router, and
Could be
D, all
C.
of above? Hot standby mode. A, you mean? Okay.
Sure.
So the answer is A. So the
Hey,
answer is
okay,
A.
so I got that round the wrong way. Because I thought in the video it said the other way, and then you mentioned this way before, so I'm updating.
Yes, that's for the hot standby. Active standby requires two. Each router has its
Oh no,
own
I
WAN.
did write that.
Mm.
Okay, no, I just can't read my writing. My bad. You actually write that down right. Whoops.
Okay, so continue now.
Continue.
So
Yep.
okay, let's look at how high availability works. There are a few items to be aware of when to use high availability. The first is the Common Address Redundancy Protocol, which is CARP. Is used for communication between the routers. Next is the Common Virtual IP Address. Is shared between the routers in high availability group. LAN clients use the virtual IP address as a default gateway. If there is more than one subnet, each VLAN will have its own virtual IP address. When a failover occurs from the primary to the secondary router, the MAC address mapped to the virtual IP address is also updated to match the active router. I'll show you that in a little more detail shortly.
Yep.
Okay. As mentioned, router needs to be set up as high availability group. This will consist of at least one primary router and one more secondary router. Each router within the group will need a different IP address, but they will share a common virtual IP address. In addition, router within the group must have the same ID. In the next example shown here, we have set ID to be 1. So, okay, so this is the high ability group, we assign 1 as a group ID. Okay, so how is the master router determined in the high availability group? The way we do this is to use the priority ID. I have highlighted in this diagram. Okay, priority ID. So the router with the highest priority ID number will have the highest priority and will become the primary or the master of the router. Where all routers have the same priority ID, then the router will with the lowest management WAN IP address will become the primary router. So you can by default, if you set all the router in the high availability group to priority ID 10, it will determine by its IP address. Okay, I'll show that later on. Okay. Okay, the authentication key is used to encrypt DARP traffic. DARP is an abbreviation for DrayTek Address Redundancy Protocol. This is done to guard against malicious attacks. So we need a little bit security. So so the high availability setup will be a little bit like not hackable to the outsources. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, a virtual IP address is shared between the routers in the group. It's used to broadcast the MAC address of the secondary router when the primary router fails. In this example shown here, we have the IP address of 192.168.2.1 as the virtual IP address gateway for the subnet 192.168.2.0, which is LAN 2. So I'll show it to you. Okay, this is the virtual IP address. And there's, okay, 192.168.2.2 is the primary router. So this is the one. See, highlighted yellow. So that's your primary router, virtual IP address of LAN 2.
Yep.
And 192.168.2.3 is the secondary router, this one.
Yep.
Okay, so notice that the MAC address is active in all LAN subnet, like the C64B D8. So see the primary. This is the MAC, right? MAC address C64B D8, and also on the LAN 2, it it has the same MAC address, and also
Mhm.
LAN 3 as well. So
Yep.
that's how you determine which is the primary. You can see that it has similar MAC address. Okay, and
And the primary router, when that goes down, it starts broadcasting
yeah,
secondary router MAC address. Yep.
yes, that's
Forwards
correct.
everything
So
to 2.3.
yes, I'll show you in the next slide. Okay, when the primary router goes offline, the secondary router takes over. All traffic is routed to the secondary router. The virtual IP address remains the same, but the MAC address is updated to match the MAC address of the secondary router, which is the BE9260. So okay, so this is the MAC address of the secondary, because the C6B4BD8 is already offline. So all the virtual IP address will update its MAC address. So that's how it works. And then all traffic goes to the secondary. Okay, go next to
So that
slide.
step in between, is that a layer 3 switch or is it classed as a router?
Can you
The first, the LAN 2 virtual IP, the
yeah,
switch that holds that virtual IP, is that a layer 3 switch or is it a router?
no, it's just ordinary switch. This one.
Okay.
So it's an ordinary switch. It can be a smart switch as long as it propagate the LAN ports.
Okay.
So the virtual IP address is just a protocol used by the two routers. So it
Yep.
creates a virtual router between them.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, let's go next. Okay, when using hot standby mode, you can enable config to synchronize the primary router configuration to other routers in the high availability group. In this example, we have configured a sync to set to 15 minutes. So if you change any of the settings of the primary router, every 15 minutes, those settings are going to be synced to the other routers in the high availability group. So we have an option here. You can set a day, hour, or minute, but by default, it's minute. Okay, the update of DNS option allows the same dynamic DNS account to be shared between all members of the high availability group. What this means is that when the secondary router becomes the primary, the DDNS profile will also be updated. This allows the network to still be accessible from the internet through the DDNS domain. So it also include the DDNS function as well. You just need to enable it. Okay, another feature of DrayTek high availability hot standby mode is the web content filter license can be shared between all the members of the high availability group. At any one time, one primary router can use the license, but if the primary router fails and the secondary router take over, it will automatically register to MyVigor and continues to provide web content filtering. But it only works in hot standby mode, not in active standby mode. Okay, so usually DrayTek has a web content filter license, so it will also be included on the hot standby mode. Once the primary router goes down, the secondary will still use the web content filter. Are you using web content filter in your office, to your class, to your clients?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Okay,
I hope so.
So this one will be a different topic as well. So
Sure.
okay, 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 now we'll discuss high availability configuration. Okay, I will explain to you how to set it up step by step.
Sure.
Okay, here is the outlining the step of configured high availability. Please note that the primary and the secondary router will have almost identical configurations except for the LAN IP address of the routers and the high availability settings, which must be set up differently. In order to establish high availability, we must initially enable it on every router. After that, we should assign a high priority ID to the primary router. For all routers, it is important to apply the same redundancy method, such as hot standby or active standby, and use the group ID and authentication key. It's important to ensure that the management interface is set to the same subnet for both the primary and the secondary router. To proceed, establish a virtual IP address for each router. So you can find all the necessary information in section 4 of your training manual and knowledge base article for 5404. This article is accessible here. Okay, to set up high availability and start hot standby mode, follow the steps. To access the high availability feature, please navigate to application menu and select high availability. Then let's begin to navigate to general setup tab. Okay, and then provide a group ID number that must be the same for all members of the high availability group. And B, as we previously discussed, the router within the highest number will be the priority and selected as primary router. It's important to note that if this setting is left as default, or if all routers have the same priority ID, then the primary router will be the one with the lowest LAN IP address. Okay, see, next we have the authentication ID, which must be identical for all members of the group, as is text string. Choose the protocol that you need to use. You can select either IPv4 or IPv6, but I would recommend IPv4 at the moment. So IPv6 is not ready yet. And E, select the management interface. So on this one, we select LAN 1. Okay, F, to ensure the smooth transition to the secondary router in case of the primary router fail, and you using the dynamic DNS, you can update your DNS section here. And then enabling syslog can help you view the high availability log. So this is important for like troubleshooting. So if there's something wrong with the high availability, it doesn't goes to when the primary router goes down and the secondary doesn't take over. This will be a great tool to look into. Then select the LAN subnet or subnet will be used. And finally, for each subnet, you need to enter the corresponding WAN IP address. This need to be unique for each subnet. Okay, please keep in mind that the virtual IP address must not match any other member on the LAN IP address. Okay, the next step is to enable the sync configuration sync. If any configuration changes are made on the primary router, all secondary router will be updated accordingly. If needed, the sync interval can be adjusted to occur daily or hourly. So you can set it to hour or day, and by default is 15 minutes. It will sync to in the sync the configuration. Okay, to configure the secondary router, we utilize comparable setting, but assign a priority ID number that is lower. So for the secondary router, we assign the priority ID to 10. To set up your routers, make sure each one has a unique LAN IP address that is not the same as HA virtual IP address. In this example, we have 192.168.1.2 as the LAN IP address and the LAN IP address of 192.168.1.1 as our virtual IP address. The virtual IP address will serve as a gateway IP address for all LAN clients. Keep in mind that if all routers in the group have the same priority ID number, the router with the lowest LAN IP address will become the primary router. Okay, here's the setting for the secondary router. The LAN IP address will be different. So for this one, we assign it 192.168.1.3. However, you notice that the virtual IP address will be the same, still the same, 192.168.1.1. In the case where your router has multiple IP subnet, it's necessary to assign a virtual IP address to each subnet. This can be done by the following steps provided here. The WAN setting on the primary router and the secondary router will be identical because they share a common WAN source. To ensure that the WAN configuration is accurate, you can check the online status of the router. To establish communication between the routers, you must choose a LAN port as a management interface. In this case, we have selected port 5. After connecting all the routers and ensuring that they are operational, you can verify the high availability status by clicking on the status link. When two routers first connect, you will see that they are synchronizing the configuration from the primary router to the secondary router, which will display progressing, so as shown here. Keep in mind that the cache time shown the duration between the router synchronization. To refresh the details of the remote router, just click Renew and up the details will be updated. To view more status information, simply click on the details page, which is illustrated here. Okay, and okay, let's have a test knowledge. Can you explain the reason for setting up a virtual IP address for every LAN when high availability mode is being used?
Well, if you don't have a virtual IP address for every LAN, then those LANs that don't have that virtual IP won't be able to use HA.
That's good. That's good. That's good. That's a correct answer. So yeah. So the virtual LAN IP address is crucial on the high availability, and it also look after the MAC address on the high availability group and the routers. Okay, so okay, now we have exercise. You can open your manual on page 37. So yeah, so we can do it now. Okay, so we have come to the end of the training module. So to summarize, we have started looking at high availability and which router supports high availability. Okay, then we look add two high availability mode, which is
Yep.
hot standby and active standby. We also look at how high availability works and how to configure it.
Mhm.
And finally, we introduce hands-on exercise where you can set up and test hot standby high availability mode.
Yep.
Okay, good. So thank you. Okay, Andrew. So